The International Newsnet World Report is a national television news show available in more than 30 million homes. We broadcast daily real news the networks won't tell you. We are solely viewer-supported. That means you. You can donate at our website, INNWorldReport.net. We hope you find the following interview informative and helpful.
Democratic constituents are being readied for yet another decisive defeat by the White House, despite the majority position in both houses of Congress. Bush has insisted on retroactive immunity for the telecom companies who aided in his unlawful spying on Americans. The House version of the Protect America Act did not allow for telecom immunity. The Senate version did. Blue Dog Democrats have again shown they may indeed be more loyal to this administration than to their own party. As it looks now, Bush will win and the American people will lose one more time. But it's not over yet. Many groups, including freepress.net, have been sending out passionate emails asking their constituents to contact Congress. Tim Karr, program director of Free Press, is here in the studio with us now. Welcome to the International Newsnet, Tim.
Thank you.
We are also joined on the phone by Illinois State Congresswoman Barbara Flynn Curry, who is one of the plaintiffs, along with author Studs Terkel, in one of the nearly 40 lawsuits against the telecoms, which are in jeopardy of being dismissed if this legislation passes. Welcome to INN, Barbara.
Thank you very much. Nice to be with you.
Barbara, first question to you. How is your lawsuit going? Is there any progress being made?
My understanding is that the cases have all been consolidated, I believe, in the 9th District in California, and I don't know exactly what additional steps have been taken. But we think it's very important to have our day in court, and there's no question if the Congress decides to give retroactive immunity to the telecoms, that day will be taken from us. We'll never know how the Bush administration used this broad power that they didn't have but argued that they should have to spy on American citizens. We'll never know if it happened once, if it happened 3,000 times. And I think it's critical that the American people know what was going on during the period when Congress had not authorized warrantless telephone tapping, but we know that the practice was going on.
Barbara, one of the complaints of the administration and their supporters is that this bill is going to be a boon to trial lawyers, and it's simply about the money. Now, I understand in these lawsuits you stated in a recent article that I saw that was released that you're not in it for the money.
We're certainly not in it for the money, and neither is the ACLU, which is our counsel in this lawsuit. But we think that without this opportunity to go forward in court, we'll never know the truth about the spying program, and there will be no deterrent to telephone companies or any other companies to avoid doing things that are illegal if the Bush administration or any other administration were to ask them to.
Now, just to clear this up for some of our viewers, was this legal at the time, or is this fully open interpretation into the war on terrorism?
Well, I believe it was not legal at the time. I'm sure you would be able to find some people who believe that it was, but I guess I would put it this way. If the Bushies are sure that what they were doing was totally legal, they did not need Congress to pass new legislation that said going forward they would be allowed to do some of this warrantless spying.
Tim Karr, campaign director for Free Press. Yesterday I received a passionate email from Free Press, and I've received several other communications on the Internet saying that there's still time to stop this. Why has Free Press gotten involved, and what can still be done?
Well, I mean, Free Press works on making sure that the future of communications is controlled by the people who communicate, that we have the Internet nowadays. It's this incredibly democratic tool for communications, and we have to make sure that when we use the Internet, we're free from this threat of censorship and surveillance that we've seen happening more and more at the hands of these very powerful phone companies. So we sent out an email yesterday because it's time that Congress stood up for our rights, basic civil rights really, to be protected against this sort of abuse. And there were some questions earlier about whether this was legal or not, and the fact that the Bush administration is seeking retroactive immunity for possible crimes would suggest that these activities are indeed illegal. And the reason that we don't know one way or the other is they've been very secretive in releasing this information. We don't know to what extent this illegal wiretapping has occurred, and we need to know. I mean, we need to know. We need to get we need to get this back on track in a number of ways. I mean, this is really, national security is an important issue, but granting immunity for phone companies for spying on Americans without legal warrant is another issue altogether, and we need to separate those. And we need to look at the legality of what's happened. We need to allow these court cases to go forward so that the American public can know the extent to which this spying has occurred.
The House Judiciary Committee, and I believe the Intelligence Committee, has asked for the documents that the Bush administration sent to the telecom companies asking for their help.
That's right.
The White House has granted those documents. Do we trust our Judiciary Committee, or do you don't believe that this will satisfy our privacy concerns, that they're not going to be looking after us?
Well, I think basically we have to get back to this very basic principle of separations of power. The executive branch of our government, which includes the White House, the Attorney General's office, the National Intelligence Office, is trying to run this operation with the phone companies, independent of any checks or balances. The ideal scenario is that when you do conduct this sort of surveillance, you receive a warrant from a court, so it goes over to the judicial branch to check and make sure that these basic abuses of power don't occur. They're trying now to do without that. So I think what we need to do is get back to what it is we're trying to accomplish and to recognize the important goal of national security, but to make sure that we do it in a way that's very accountable to the fundamental principles of our Constitution.
What is the reasoning behind Congress's shift from, well, certainly the House of Representatives, from their shift? And we knew in the Senate Chris Dodd had a great campaign against this. What possible reason could they be, let's say, capitulating on this? Well,
President Bush has said that the phone companies are providing a patriotic service to Americans and therefore should be free of these sorts of lawsuits. And what's really happening here is you have a very powerful corporate lobby. And companies like AT&T and Verizon give tens of millions of dollars every year in campaign contributions. They practically own the lobbyists on K Street, and they have access to the highest rungs of power throughout Washington. So while there is a lot of rhetoric about national security, I think there's a lot of currying of favor going on here as well. And when you see House Democrats capitulating in this way, there are legitimate concerns, perhaps, within the Beltway, that if they were to speak out against the phone and cable lobby, the telephone lobby in this instance, that they stand a threat come time for them to get reelected. This very powerful lobby can exert their influence in a number of ways that could wreak considerable political damage.
House Democrats have said on the floor several times that the current FISA bill serves the same purpose and that Americans are protected without this act, and that the immunity part of it now perhaps can be split off for a separate vote, although we don't believe that that vote will pass also. The question is, are Americans indeed protected without this act being in place?
I believe that they are, and I believe that everybody in America should get involved in this issue, and they need to get involved very soon, because from what I understand, the Democrats in the House are about to strike a compromise that will allow Bush to sign this bill. And in order for them to do that, according to the Bush administration, this immunity has to be in place. And they need to hear from the people, the American public, that this cannot go through. So we've asked our members to write letters to Congress. We've asked them to call their members of Congress. And we're also working with a number of organizations like the ACLU and the EFF that you had mentioned to get this through. And this, I think the only way we can protect ourselves is by taking action ourselves, calling Congress, and creating some grassroots pressure to get Washington back on track, acting on the behalf of most Americans.
And would everyone agree that the NSA is part of the government? It's hard to, we can't really separate them apart. And the reason I say that is that back in February 2001, Quest Communications was approached by the Bush administration to begin just such a program. This is 7 months before 9/11. Will this legislation, if passed with the retroactive immunity, also stop any inquiry into activities before September 11th that involved spying on Americans?
Well, we haven't seen the language of the supposed amendment, the compromise that is now being struck right now, but you bring up a very valid and important point. if this spying did indeed occur before September 11th, then a lot of the rationale that the Bush administration has for doing this